We're here at Fields Point, our salt marsh restoration site, in the fall of 2008, and we're really encouraged to see how the marsh has begun to coalesce and look more like a natural salt marsh than the marsh that we planted back in 2004. We planted the entire site that you see with a combination of salt marsh plants. The grasses that you see along the edge of the water are called cordgrass or Spartina alterniflora, and these grasses, for the first 4 growing seasons, it's taken a good amount of time for them to coalesce and become one continuous band of vegetation. A few of the stressors that this marsh has experienced include a sizable fetch, we have a lot of wave energy here at our Fields Point site in Providence, so that wave energy has caused plants to get uprooted as they've gotten established. And over the last couple growing seasons, at the end of the growing season, we've had significant damage from Canada geese and mute swans. This used to be a shoreline filled with rubble, landfill debris, car parts, concrete laden with rebar. And when we did the excavation, we excavated about 3,500 cubic yards of salt marsh, we excavated 3,500 cubic yards of landfill debris and brought it to an elevation, the shoreline to an elevation where salt marsh plants can grow, and brought in some sand that you can see along the upper edge of the marsh. And by doing so, we changed the intertidal habitat. We changed what was out there. So all of a sudden, we had a spawning area for horseshoe crabs, a feeding area for shorebirds, and of course, an area where salt marsh could grow. So that was a benefit that we weren't expecting. We've also created a shoreline that is much more accessible to the numbers of students and public that come to the Save the Bay Center. This site, again, was pretty difficult to access due to the landfill material, and now we use this site for shoreline exploration with many of our school-based education programs here at Save the Bay. When we designed this site, we needed to have some type of structure. The stones I'm standing on and that you see along the edge of the water, those were brought in, and they act as structure so that the planting medium, the sand that was brought in to plant the salt marsh plants into, wouldn't wash away. 4 years after we did the initial planting, the salt marsh plants, the cordgrass, is actually beginning to grow into the wall structure. This rock has also acted as a substrate for rockweed, and we've seen shorebirds feeding on it, so it's providing some type of habitat in and of itself. This is a good example here of how geese and swans have damaged our salt marsh, our salt marsh as it begins to grow together. Behind me, this is an area that we planted in 2004, and it really has grown together. You can see it's very thick. There's actually been a buildup of salt marsh, the peat or the mud that is found in a salt marsh. It's very silty mud versus the sand that we originally brought in. So these salt marshes actually can build up soil or build up fine sediments over time. And you see that behind me. These little plants here in front of me have been grazed by geese this summer. They've actually been sheared down, and that stresses the plant. Then later in the fall, when these plants go dormant, these are perennials, and so they'll go dormant, and all of the energy gets brought down into the roots. That's when the geese and swans have literally dug up the plants and eaten the roots, and thereby killing the plant completely. We've seen areas the size, like a 3-foot by 3-foot hole along the edge of these salt marsh plants where swans have dug them up. We use deer netting that people use to keep deer out of their yards, and we attach it to these stakes, and basically this is preventing the geese from getting into the marsh behind me, Because this is a brownfield site and I'm standing on old landfill debris, it's very difficult to get any stake in the ground because of all the material from the landfill. So we've had definitely a difficult challenge keeping these stakes in place and therefore keeping the deer fence up. In areas where we've been able to keep the deer fence and the geese out, the plants have grown together. In other areas where we haven't, the swans and the geese have been able to cause quite a large amount of damage to our plants. Every tide, the salt water comes in, the bay water comes in and floods the area that we're standing right now. So this gets flooded twice a day, and these are the conditions that these salt marsh plants can thrive in. Further up on the shoreline, that band of tall shrubs is a type of bush called high tide bush. And it grows at the very upper edge of the tide. When we have large tides, high tides from the full and the new moon, the tide will actually get to the very top of the shoreline and flood that area. So it can tolerate salt a couple times a month. And the beach area in between, we were originally hoping that high marsh vegetation would grow on that area, but due to the exposure of the site, that shoreline is too steep, and the sand, even though when we put it on the site, when we spread it across the site, it was very flat, but because of the wave energy, we have a pretty steep slope here, which isn't suitable for high marsh vegetation. We're hoping over time, as this low marsh grows together, we might begin to see high marsh creeping up that shoreline edge. This salt marsh is small in comparison to the salt marshes around Narragansett Bay, but it is a very important habitat in this urbanized waterfront here we have in Providence. It's provided an important habitat for the variety of animals that I mentioned, from the shorebirds to the horseshoe crabs. We find steamer clams growing in the mud around the salt marsh plants. And it's also provided a great example of how to restore these coastal brownfields or urbanized sites to other coastal property owners. So this has been a great model of what can be done, taking an old landfill and trying to bring back some habitat value that was here historically.